There's one guy that stands out in my mind as the reason for the Bruins losing the first round of the playoffs. It has to be Ken Dryden.
Yeah, when he came up in 71, it was just like for us, we should have won the series, but he just killed us. We just couldn't score any goals on him. And talk to the rest of the players from Montreal. They say, the only time he plays great is against you guys. Well, then he should have picked somebody else because he cost us a lot. But he was a great goaltender, and it's just a great man, too.
It seemed that he was able to just block big portions of the net. And players not having the time to really evaluate how much space might be available would see nothing but Ken Dryden.
Imagine a goaltender who won 6 Stanley Cups in 8 seasons, lost only 57 games in his entire career, and walked away at 31, right at his peak. His name was Ken Dryden. Standing 6 feet 4 inches tall, he had a habit of leaning on his stick between plays, chin resting on the knob, watching his opponents like a scientist observing an experiment. Forwards hated it. They called him the thieving giraffe. Bobby Orr, arguably the greatest defenseman who ever lived, said it plainly. Dryden was better than anything we could have imagined. In the spring of 1971, the Boston Bruins were considered unstoppable. Phil Esposito had just set NHL records with 76 goals and 152 points in a single regular season. Bobby Orr was rewriting what a defenseman could do. Boston had won the Stanley Cup the year before and was fully expected to win it again. Montreal had other plans, and a secret weapon almost nobody had heard of. Ken Dryden had played exactly 6 regular season games before being handed the starting job for the playoffs. No scouting reports, no game film, no known weaknesses, just a 23-year-old law student from Cornell University, standing in the crease, waiting. In Game 5 of that quarterfinal series, with the Boston Garden roaring around him, Esposito bore down on Dryden from close range, the same shot that had beaten every other goaltender in the league all season long. Dryden stretched out his left arm, all 42 inches of it, and swallowed the puck. Esposito stood there, stared, then cursed at the top of his lungs, and slammed his stick against the glass behind the net. "You thieving giraffe!" Montreal eliminated Boston in 7 games. The defending champions were gone. Writing about that moment years later in his book The Game, published in 1983, Dryden recalled, "I looked at the faces of the Bruins, and I could see it all so clearly. They all looked defeated." Bobby Orr years later gave perhaps the most honest tribute of all. Dryden was better than anything we could have imagined. A rookie with 6 games of NHL experience had just ended the reign of the most feared team in hockey. In the summer of 1973, Ken Dryden had just won his 2nd Stanley Cup and his first Vezina Trophy. He was 25 years old. The Montreal Canadiens offered him a contract he considered well below his value. He knew at least 6 other goaltenders in the league were earning more. So he walked away. Instead of reporting to training camp, Dryden spent the entire 1973-74 season articling at the Toronto law firm of Osler, Hoskin & Harcourt, earning $135 a week. The message was deliberate. Hockey did not own him. Without him, Montreal allowed 56 more goals than the previous season and was eliminated in the first round of the playoffs by the New York Rangers. Scotty Bowman, who coached the Canadiens' dynasty through its greatest years, later acknowledged that without Dryden, the entire defensive system built around him had lost its anchor. Every structure, every defensive assignment, every trap had been designed with the assumption that Dryden was at the back of it. Without him, none of it held. He returned the following season on his own terms. The dynasty resumed almost immediately. Every goaltender in NHL history has had a way of keeping themselves sharp between plays. Some skated small circles. Some talked to themselves. Some banged their posts. Ken Dryden leaned on his stick and stared. Whenever the puck was at the far end of the ice, Dryden would fold his arms over the top of his stick, rest his chin on his gloves, and watch. Still. Patient. Completely unbothered. One sports writer at the time described it as a man who looked like a street cleaner resting on his broom, utterly indifferent to the chaos around him. For opposing forwards, that image was suffocating. It communicated something no trash talk ever could, that you were not interesting enough to make him move. Dryden understood exactly what he was doing. In The Game, published in 1983, he wrote, "When you are a presence, there are many things you need not do, for it is simply understood you can do them. So you don't do them. You don't risk what you need not risk. You let others' imaginations do them for you, for they do them better than you can." That pose, now known simply as the lean, became so iconic that a life-size bronze statue of it stands at the entrance of the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto. Dryden never needed to intimidate anyone with words or aggression. The silence did it for him. He let every shooter's own imagination build the wall he was standing in front of. On September 2nd, 1972, Ken Dryden took his place in goal at the Montreal Forum for the most politically charged hockey game ever played, Canada versus the Soviet Union. The entire country assumed it would be a one-sided win for the NHL professionals. By the final buzzer, the Soviets had won 7-3. Dryden was shaken. The Soviet system, precise passes, relentless conditioning, a completely different logic of the game, was unlike anything he had ever prepared for. His personal statistics across the series were difficult. A goals against average of 4.75 in 4 games. He was outperformed by his own teammate Tony Esposito and by the Soviet goaltender Vladislav Tretiak. But Canada won the series, and in the years that followed, what endured was not the numbers. It was the impression Dryden left on the people across the ice. Vladislav Tretiak, widely considered the greatest goaltender the Soviet Union ever produced, later spoke at length about his rival. He said, "Dryden was always a true star. Much of his brilliance came from his intelligence. He read the game so well. It wasn't only his size and quick reflexes, but also his ability to anticipate plays, to sense what the forwards would do. He was reliable and strong, someone who could be counted on, both on the ice and in life." When Dryden's number 29 was retired by the Montreal Canadiens in January 2007, Tretiak was there in person, invited by Dryden himself. The two rivals stood together on the ice as friends. That moment said everything about the kind of fear Dryden inspired. Not hatred, but deep, lasting respect. By the mid-1970s, the Philadelphia Flyers had built the most feared identity in professional hockey. They were known as the Broad Street Bullies, a team that won back-to-back Stanley Cups in 1974 and 1975 by playing some of the most physically punishing hockey the sport had ever seen. Their strategy was simple and effective. Hurt people, frighten people, make them not want the puck. It worked against almost everyone, until they met Ken Dryden in the 1976 Stanley Cup Final. Montreal swept Philadelphia in 4 straight games. Not one game was close enough to be a blowout, but not once did the Flyers find a way through. Their intimidation tactics, the hits, the provocations, the fights, landed on Dryden like rain on stone. He stood in his crease, still and focused, and simply refused to be rattled. Dryden had deep feelings about what the Flyers represented. He later wrote in Dick Irvin's book, In the Crease, that the 1976 championship was personal for him. He described it as a Stanley Cup of triumph, of revenge, of setting things right, of responsibility self-imposed. He despised the violence. He believed it was wrong for the sport, wrong for the people playing it, and wrong as a model of how competition should work. Beating the Flyers was not just a championship. It was a statement. The Broad Street Bullies had terrorized the NHL for 2 years. Ken Dryden ended their era without throwing a single punch. Some careers can only be understood through numbers. Ken Dryden's numbers do not look real. In 397 regular season games across 8 seasons, he finished with 258 wins and only 57 losses, a winning percentage of 74.3. He recorded 46 shutouts. His goals against average was 2.24, and his save percentage of .922 is tied for the highest in NHL history. In the playoffs, across 112 games, he went 80-32. He won 6 Stanley Cups, 5 Vezina trophies, the Conn Smythe Trophy, and the Calder Trophy, the last 2 in back-to-back seasons, making him the only player in league history to win the playoff MVP before winning the Rookie of the Year award. In 1976-77, his finest season, the Montreal Canadiens went 60-8 in the regular season. In that postseason, Dryden posted a goals against average of 1.56. He retired at 31. Not because his body gave out, not because the game passed him by. He simply decided he was done, walked away with 6 championships in hand, and went on to become a lawyer, an author, a member of Canadian Parliament, and a Hockey Hall of Fame inductee in 1983. NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman said after his passing in September 2025, "It is almost incomprehensible to believe that he accomplished all of that." Ken Dryden never needed to be the loudest man in the room. He just needed to be in the room. What moment impressed you most about him? Leave a comment below.